Marvel Cinematic Universe is about as expansive as modern movie franchises get. And yet, even with such a massive canvas on which to tell basically any kind of story they want, Marvel Studios hasn't always found room for everything, for better or worse. There are many pivotal or amusing MCU moments that ended up taking place largely off-screen, leaving fans to basically fill in the blanks in their own imagination. So with that in mind then, I'm Ellie with What Culture here with 10 off-screen MCU moments we all want to see. Number 10. The fallout of the blip in Avengers Endgame. In terms of sheer global impact, the most glaring MCU omission to date is surely the 5 years worth of trauma and chaos that transpired during the blip before Thanos' decimation of the universe was finally undone in Avengers Endgame. In the 4+ years since Infinity War was released, we've seen only fleeting snippets of life during the blip, despite the absolute goldmine of material it offers for both movies and especially more expansive Disney Plus shows. The psychological impact of the snap on those left behind, both regular civilians and superheroes, speaks for itself, not to ignore the volatile power vacuum as various unsnapped villains scramble to take advantage of the situation. This would be a fascinatingly eerie setting for future MCU stories, and it's frankly baffling that we've seen so little of what is undeniably the most pivotal and transformative event in the MCU's history to date. While there's likely never going to be a time where fans won't want to see more of life during the blip, it nevertheless makes sense to strike while the iron's hot and tell these stories while Infinity War and Endgame are still fresh in fans' minds. Number 9. Hulk becomes SAKAAR'S champion in THOR Ragnarok. Though THOR Ragnarok lovingly incorporated elements of the beloved Planet Hulk comic storyline, many fans decried the fact that it was ultimately adapted in such a piecemeal fashion, effectively serving as a relatively minor portion of Ragnarok's story. By the time we first see the Hulk on the alien planet SAKAAR, he's already a much ballyhooed champion gladiator, when the journey getting to that point would arguably be much more interesting and entertaining. Ultimately, it would have been ideal for the MCU to simply adapt the Planet Hulk story in a more overt way, showing the Hulk's rise through the ranks as an unmatched combatant who wins himself a legion of adoring fans in the process. A Planet Hulk movie styled as a parody of classic sports films could have been a lot of fun, an array of awesome gladiatorial combat crossed with a giddy satire of the cult of celebrity Hulk enjoys on SAKAAR. Sadly, it feels like the boat has well and truly sailed on this one, especially with Marvel still not pulling the trigger on a solo Hulk film, though it's not entirely out of the question that we might catch a flashback to SAKAAR in the upcoming She-Hulk series. Number 8. Peter number 3 as a bitter, vengeful Spider-Man in Spider-Man No Way Home. One of Spider-Man No Way Home's greatest triumphs was in doing justice to Andrew Garfield's iteration of Peter Parker, who was of course done so dirty by the wildly uneven Amazing Spider-Man films. By the time we reconvene with him in No Way Home, it's clear that Peter number 3 isn't in a good place. He confesses that he's still racked with guilt over the death of his love Gwen Stacy, and in the years since her demise, he's become a bitter shadow of his former self. Though Peter number 3 doesn't go into specifics, he basically implies that he shifted away from being a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man and instead transformed into a more violent, merciless type of superhero, while using his persona to distract himself from the realities of his grief. While Peter number 3 thankfully wound up in a far better spot by the end of No Way Home, it sure would be fascinating to see a down-and-out, ruthlessly unforgiving Spider-Man vengefully prowling the streets in the wake of Gwen's death. The fact that Peter number 3 anguished over his loss for so many years would have surely seen him embark on some uniquely dark adventures as Spider-Man, ones quite unlike those undertaken by either Tobey Maguire or Tom Holland's variants of the character. We'll almost certainly never get to see anything from the period between The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and No Way Home, sadly, but the storytelling possibilities are nevertheless massive. Number 7. Cap returns the Soul Stone to Red Skull in Avengers Endgame. There are many things that fans would love to see because they'd simply be awesome as hell, and then there are moments so outrageously weird and awkward that the novel curiosity factor speaks for itself. Case in point, when Captain America returns the Infinity Stones to their original places in time at the conclusion of Avengers Endgame. As Cap had to visit Vormir to return the Soul Stone, that surely guaranteed he had a surprise encounter with the Soul Stone Stonekeeper, his own former nemesis Red Skull. One can only imagine the look on both of their faces faces when they each cast their gaze upon the other. What would they have said and done? Would they have fought? While the countless possibilities are perhaps more exciting than the franchise ever actually committing to a concrete answer, this potential-filled belated reunion between Cap and Red Skull is still consistently one of the MCU's most requested missing scenes. Number 6. Hulk's nightmare vision in Avengers: Age of Ultron. Though Scarlet Witch ends up joining the Avengers during Age of Ultron's third act, she and her brother Quicksilver are initially presented as antagonists, hell-bent on revenge against Tony Stark and his comrades. Scarlet Witch uses her abilities to attack the heroes with horrifying visions, such as Stark witnessing an illusion of Earth being successfully invaded by the Chitauri. Wanda also subdues Bruce Banner by forcing him to witness a vision, one which causes him to uncontrollably Hulk out, requiring Tony Stark to stop him with his new Hulkbuster armor. Yet, unlike with Stark, we never actually see the content of Banner's vision, though the implication is clearly that it's something intensely disturbing enough to make him transform into the Hulk. Given that all of Wanda's other visions were either reminders of a horrific past or premonitions of a painful future, it's reasonable to assume that Banner may have been witnessing his worst nightmare, losing control of his abilities and causing a mass catastrophe. Whatever the content, it's certainly a shame we didn't get to see it, because anything traumatic enough to freak out the big green guy sure must be bad. Number 5. The Secret Avengers fighting crime in Avengers: Infinity War. Captain America's Civil War concludes with Cap breaking his imprisoned allies out of the raft, which of course leads to the events of Avengers: Infinity War, where Team Cap is effectively working as the Secret Avengers. Despite their awesome new looks, especially Black Widow's blonde hair and Cap's thick beard, the Secret Avengers' time as off-the-grid heroes is disappointingly short-lived, with them rejoining the core Avengers lineup in an attempt to stop Thanos. Considering that roughly 2 years passed between Civil War and Infinity War, that's a lot of unexplored time for Cap, Black Widow and Falcon to be off around the globe fighting crime. One can only imagine the more minor comic book villains they could have battled during that time, and which could have made for a thrilling movie or limited series in its own right. This is another corner of MCU lore we probably won't get to see much, if any of, unfortunately, especially given the monumental cost of getting Chris Evans, Scarlett Johansson and Anthony Mackie back together for even a 6-episode Disney Plus show. Number 4. Mordo tries to kill Strange a lot in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. The first Doctor Strange concluded with the revelation that the villainous Karl Mordo was effectively plotting to purge sorcerers on Earth, with the implication being that he was coming for Doctor Strange 2. Mordo reappears in the recent Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, albeit not quite how anyone expected. The version of Mordo in the film is a sorcerer supreme from the alt universe Earth 838, while the Mordo from Strange Prime's own universe is never actually seen. However, Strange does make a comment about the original Mordo having dedicated his life to trying to assassinate him ever since we last saw him, with all of these attempts evidently being unsuccessful. Considering the apparent gravity of Mordo's heel turn in the first film's post-credits scene, it is a bit of a cop-out that this still hasn't been properly followed up almost 6 years later. A montage showing off Mordo's various botched attempts to kill Strange in a multitude of wacky scenarios could have been insanely fun, but with credible rumours suggesting that a scrapped scene saw Mordo being executed by Wanda at the start of the sequel, we may never see the original Mordo again. Number 3. Young Loki turns into a snake and stabs Thor in Thor Ragnarok. While many of the moments on this list are broader and more conceptual, there's one incredibly specific moment mentioned in Thor Ragnarok that just about everybody would love to see. In the film, Thor hilariously mentions that when he and Loki were just 8 years old, Loki transformed himself into a snake. Thor, being a great lover of snakes, went to pick the reptile up, at which point Loki turned back into himself and stabbed his brother, confirming he's been a sneaky trickster from a most tender young age. Incredibly funny though the story might be, as told by Thor, actually seeing it would be something else entirely. We can only hope that we might see the scene play out for real in the upcoming Thor Love and Thunder, especially as the trailer confirms that the film will feature flashbacks of Thor's youth. Sometimes a story is only as good as you tell it, but in the case of young Loki turning himself into a snake and stabbing Thor, we definitely need to see it. Number 2. Thanos destroys Xandar for the Power Stone in Avengers: Infinity War. Avengers Infinity War kicked off with a big surprise, revealing that Thanos had actually already picked up the Power Stone from Xandar, with it later being confirmed that he sacked the planet and annihilated the Nova Corps in the process. The Mad Titan then used the stone to intercept and attack the Statesman, the ship harboring the Asgardian refugees, as well as Thor, Loki, the Hulk, and Heimdall, and acquire the Space Stone. While earlier drafts of Infinity War's script did indeed show Thanos destroying Xandar, it was ultimately cut to avoid repetitious scenes of Thanos wrecking locations and pinching coloured stones, even if it left many fans disappointed regardless. More than 4 years since Infinity War's release, fans still regularly lament the scene's absence, while holding out hope that the recently announced MCU Nova project will feature a flashback to Thanos' destruction of the planet. While the event has arguably now been built up so much that it'll struggle to satisfy everyone, it'd still be quite the sight to witness Thanos wreaking havoc on Xandar. Number 1. Peter and May argue over him being Spider-Man in Spider-Man Homecoming. Spider-Man Homecoming ends on an extremely funny and unexpected exclamation point when Peter dons his recently returned Spider-Man suit, only to be greeted by an unsuspecting Aunt May, who loudly shouts, "What the f?" as we abruptly cut to the credits. Given that sequel Far From Home picks up many years later after the blip, we never get to see any sort of confrontation or discussion between Peter and May about this shocking superheroic revelation. The heavy dramatic lifting all takes place off-screen, with May having fully accepted Peter's web-slinging superheroism by this point in time. And yet, considering both the awkwardly comedic and character-driven potential of such a scenario, it's a shame that we never got to see it. Knowing the headstrong, fiercely protective May's foul-mouthed reaction to seeing Peter in the Spidey suit, we can only imagine that the two didn't exactly have a calm exchange of words before she came around to the idea, or more likely realised she was powerless to stop her nephew. There isn't an immediately obvious place where this scene could have been slotted in, really, beyond appearing as a credits scene in Homecoming or an establishing scene in Infinity War, but even then it likely would have felt pretty rushed in either case. And that concludes our list. If you can think of any we missed, then do let us know in the comments below. And while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe and tap that notification bell. Also, head over to Twitter and follow us there, and I can be found across various social medias just by searching Ellie Little Child. I've been Ellie with What Culture. I hope you have a magical day, and I'll see you real soon.